Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to talk about Nigel Farage's continuing whining about Coutts not letting him have his Millionaire's elite account. And I might as well. The rest of the press is all over it today. But as well as discussing the limited range of real explanations, I'd also like to discuss how I not only find it incredibly amusing, but I think it must be the best thing Farage can be doing right now. Because he would normally be whipping up outrage against vulnerable people and causing real harm. I actually see his campaign here as distracting people away from his culture wars. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, this banking furore, real look into the fragile ego of Nigel Farage, isn't it? See, let's look at what's really happened. Farage was told that his Coutts account would be closed, but that he could have a NatWest account. Now, I'll go over the possible reasons for the closure of his account, even though we know what's really done it. But what is absolutely certain, without any shred of doubt, is that Coutts told him they would be closing his Millionaire's account and offering him the sort of account that ordinary people make do with. This is not disputed. So he's raging at the idea of having the sort of bank account that ordinary people like you or I do. Remarkable to consider that this man who has built up his earnings potential based on being a man of the people. And he's throwing a weeks-long strop about having to use a bank account of the people. But last night he seemed much happier. Why? Well, it was certainly nothing to do with his... was it on Newsnight? It was on Newsnight being made to look utterly ridiculous. But generally speaking, he seemed happy enough on Twitter because he'd seen the front pages of today's newspapers and they're all over this outrage about banks closing accounts down because of your political views. And it's a measure of just how sensitive his ego is. He rages when he's told to be treated like ordinary people, but pleased when the mainstream media make a fuss over him. Being clear, it makes no sense that Coutts are taking this action because of his political views. To even entertain the notion, you'd have to ask, well, first of all, why didn't they do it years ago? After all, his political views haven't changed since his school days when he was carrying out Nazi salutes in the corridors and classrooms. There would have been others dropped for sharing the same political views. Like yesterday in Parliament, Jacob Rees-Mogg, he made an issue of this in Parliament, didn't he? But he wasn't saying that he's lost his Coutts account. Now, really, how much daylight is there between the political views of Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg? So if Nigel Farage has lost it for political views, why wouldn't Jacob Rees-Mogg? Why wouldn't several others? Why would one lose their account and not the other? At the end of the day, Coutts will have had one of two motivations for closing this account. The first is the stated reason, and they've stated it again today. He did not have enough money deposited to comply with their rules. Coutts is the bank of billionaires. Of course, it's not just billionaires. They also serve those who are merely multimillionaires. But their rules require substantial deposits or investments. If Farage has fallen below these standards, and they insist he has, and he seems to have admitted that he has, there was a comment, I'll put the clip below, suggesting it was ultimately because although he'd fallen below the standards, he'd been allowed to keep the account for a while he was paying his mortgage off because of his house effectively represented that security, that sort of value. But now that he's paid it off, all of a sudden it's no longer the bank of no claim on it. So he's fallen below that level. That's really all there is to it. And they've reiterated that again today. Coutts have actually brought out another statement going, Nigel Farage seems to be talking crap. We'll just remind people, we offered him a bank account. He can bank with NatWest. That's also in our group. The second possible reason, if we assume that Coutts is lying, is reputational. Nothing to do with political views. Banks have to be very careful to make sure their accounts are not being used for, say, money laundering or funding terrorism. There's a legal duty. And, of course, a reputational hit if they are exposed. So it is possible, you could say Coutts lied, it's very unlikely, about closing the account due to lack of funds. But the truth will be because they find some of his transactions suspicious. Doesn't mean he's doing anything illegal, just that Coutts may not be confident. But as I say, in reality, given that we know Coutts have these rules on how much money you need, and Farage is not disputing the fact that he doesn't have that money in that account, it seems to me that it's very likely that Coutts are, do you know what, just telling the truth. But what I would say is this, for all of Farage's raging in the media, where's the formal action then? Like, if he thinks he's been wrong, He can write. Rishi Sunak in Parliament yesterday said, well, he can write to the Ombudsman. So why hasn't he? He keeps threatening court action. Well, where is it? Being honest, I want Nigel Farage to take Coots to court. I'll tell you why. This banking fury is actually brilliant. Not only is Nigel Farage pushing it as a personal mission, it's on the front page of the Times, the Mail, the Telegraph, the Express, even the Financial Times. Now, you could say, well, actually, Phil, this is disgraceful, isn't it? Shouldn't they be reporting on the real news, you know? Oh, absolutely. But it's by-election day today. Most of these outlets would not be reporting on real news today at all. So if the likes of the Mail, the Express, the Telegraph and so on, if they were already going to publish distractions anyway, they were already always going to do that. I would rather they went for this than their usual culture wars. Because consider what these ghouls are normally doing when they need to distract to cover for the Tories. They would be spreading malicious lies and causing real harm to people who can't defend themselves. Or attempting to. They've been a little bit less successful of late. But although the malice and the lies might be there in these articles, is there really that much harm? It's not inciting people to carry out attacks on innocent people. Even though the government have jumped onto this bandwagon, it's not going to result in legislation being pushed, which removes more of our rights. So who's in the firing line here? Banks. And banks, should they feel that this story might cause them reputational damage, are more than capable of defending their reputation in court. You know, Coots are pretty much daring Nigel Farage to take them to court. He's going, I'll go take you to court. Go on then. Go on then. They've got the money to defend themselves. I'd rather we didn't have to put up with these sideshows at all. But if they're going to happen, this one's brilliant. It might even end up with Farage looking like a right tit at the end of it again. After all, what does he hope to achieve? Like, focus on what is he going to achieve. Let's consider the possibilities. First, that the media pressure forces Coots to reverse their decision and give him his elite millionaire's bank account back. That's not very likely, is it? The popular press are unlikely to have much sway with a bank whose poorest customers are multi-millionaires. What would Coots have to fear? That a load of GB News viewers stop using their services? You know, when you get a campaign in the popular press to put pressure on a company, it works when it's a company that has a lot of customers who may be readers of that outlet. Second possibility is that he successfully sues them for a load of money. It turns out actually he has got a grievance, takes them to court, wins a load of money. Really hard to see how has he any grounds for this at all. I'd also suggest that if he did, legal action would already be underway. He keeps threatening it, but where is it? Third possibility, that he wants to pressure the government into introducing some legislation, some change to our laws. That's another reason for a campaign like this. But what? Reform UK are currently saying that they would change the law so that everyone has the right to a bank account. That law already exists. It's an EU law, by the way, which Reform UK have argued should be dropped. But the right to a bank account is not the right to all types of account. Nigel Farage is not being denied banking services. He just wants a pleb account. And in fact, you know, we know that he's not being denied banking services because he's still able to go out and about his business. He was saying he might be forced to leave the country. We all got excited. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. Now, if he genuinely was being denied banking services, well, he'd probably have to. I mean, how do you manage in this day and age without a bank account? Certainly not someone like Nigel Farage, got no chance. So he would have to leave the country, but he's not going to, is he? Because he's not being denied banking services. He's just being denied a particular elite account, and he doesn't want to have a pleb account. So there's no chance of any legislation emerging because the legislation already exists. And there's no way that Rishi will put his shoulder behind a policy that allows ordinary people to demand to have the same bank account that he does. And what other legislation could possibly emerge? None that I can think of. It's hard to see where Farage ends up going with this. See, the more he ramps up the focus, the more people he gets. He's like a madman in a park and attracting a crowd. But the more people, the more onlookers there are. At some point, they're going to think, OK, we get your argument. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do, Nigel? If he takes the bank to court, doesn't he risk scrutiny over his financial affairs? If he doesn't, well, doesn't this just then fizzle out with him looking rather silly? Because people will forever say, well, why didn't you take him to court then? Why didn't you take him to court? There's no point. Why not? Other people take banks to court. Sometimes they win. And in the meantime, for every day he spends whining about the loss of his elite bank account, he's not shouting at the sea or trying to corral people into terrorising frightened children or even attacking lifesavers in this country. You know, I'm actually finding it hard to identify damage that Farage is doing here or can do with this nonsense. He's saying it's outrageous that people can have their bank accounts closed for their political beliefs. Well, I think people would agree with that. If that is what was happening, people would actually agree. It doesn't split anyone. It's not a wedge issue. He's not pushing any culture war buttons here because everyone would agree with it. I find it remarkable that Rishi Sunak has jumped on board with this. What good does it think it does him? I mean, if Farage has had his account closed down unfairly, isn't the Prime Minister the very person to do something about it? I mean, complaining about what a disgrace it is, that's what you would do in opposition, where you've got no power to change anything. Not the head of government who can change guidance or even legislation. If Sunak keeps riding this bandwagon, isn't there a danger someone reminds him that he's the head of government and asks him what he's going to do about it then? After all, if the Prime Minister says something's a disgrace, the immediate reaction is, OK, so what are you going to do to change it then? But either way, I don't see that it's a problem. We get to be entertained at Nigel Farage's meltdown. The government are once again pushing a cause that isn't dealing with the fundamental problems that voters have. And nobody innocent seems to be being harmed. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.